The Broken Brain is proud this month to highlight the charity Stand in Pride, which was founded by Daniel Blevins and is an organization that helps members of the LGBTQ plus community to find stand-ins or found family and friends, particularly when the coming out process has caused people to withdraw from their lives. And they might find that they need a stand-in family and friends to attend weddings, funerals, receptions, graduations, things of that nature, and on a deeper level to create that social support system that they, like all of us, need and crave. You can find the Stand in Pride app, which is a way to join and to volunteer and follow through to be an ally or to find people who are there for you. Go to your app store for your phone and look up Stand in Pride. You can follow Daniel Blevins on Instagram or TikTok at _zombie_Dan and learn more about this this local charity that he started. It's a local charity that also has, international reach due to the technology and app. You can learn more about and support their program by going to standinpride.org. Download the app. You can donate. You can also buy merch that they have available as well. If you choose to support The Broken Brain and joining our Patreon at patreon.com/brokenbrain, as always, whatever charity we are highlighting in the month that you join, 50% of your donation will always go to that charity for the duration of your membership. Enjoy the show.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, your host again, to talk about the intersection of culture, psychology, and things that might end the world. That one's not on every episode, but we'll decide if that was a dramatic intro or not as we get in. My guests are those that would be able to help us with that question. I am very, very happy to be joined today by the creators and hosts of the Suspicious Minds show, and we're going to get into that and what they talk about. So I'm joined by Sean O'Grady, who's an award-winning filmmaker, Dr. Ian Gold, who is the professor and chair of philosophy and professor of psychiatry at McGill, and Dr. Joel Gold, assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Icahn School of Medicine and Mount Sinai, and of course two brothers as well, not just a coincidence that you have the last name. And the Doctors Gold are also the authors of Suspicious Minds, How Culture Shapes Madness. And probably the most important biographical fact of all, Dr. Joel Gold, returning champion here to the Broken Brain, one of my earliest guests, actually.
I recall it fondly.
Yeah, oh, good. About 150 years ago when I started the podcast. So welcome back. It's been a minute.
To be back.
So was super glad when I saw this project and said, hey, I know him. So anyway, welcome, everybody. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Good to be
with
here.
you.
Thanks.
Well, let me have you guys, if you want to tell people a little bit more about where you're coming from and more about what this project is. I guess I should add that this is a show talking about the relationship between AI and just human relations, mental health, and delusion, all that kind of interesting stuff that we're seeing. So, yeah, feel free to jump in, tell everybody a little bit about Suspicious Minds.
Yeah, I can jump in and kick this off. So this all started with the Gold's book, as you mentioned. And it was a book that I had been truly obsessed with for a long time. And we were in the process of adapting it into a documentary series that was really going to cover the content of the book kind of as is, which is how delusions are affected by culture and how psychosis can be affected by culture as well. And the book, well, I don't know if you know anything about how developing documentaries or documentary series goes, but it takes forever. It is a terribly slow process. It involves a lot of money and a lot of people, and it just takes time. And
especially when it's really, really good. And I will say, like one of the things that strikes me right away, as you can tell, this is quality. When I watch your show, it's like, this is high quality product that you guys are turning out as well. So that I'm extra expensive, extra people, extra work, right?
Well, actually, it was funny. We'll kind of get to that. This is the tell the story urgently with the resources we have version of this project.
You're just
because
that
good. We were just that good. No, we're in the process of doing this, and while that was happening, the book ends with a bit of I try not to speak about it too dramatically, but it ends with a bit of a warning that due to sort of the internet and the rise of social media, that we could be facing the largest mental health crisis of all time. One of the things that the brothers talk about in the book is this idea that living in a large city is something that can adversely affect your mental state. It can be a trigger for psychosis and for delusions, and they can get more into why that might be the case. But we were going into what we were doing, our adaptation, thinking, in the time since they wrote the book, things with the internet, things with social media, this has all gotten worse than kind of what they'd predicted. And while we were doing that, AI chatbots hit the market publicly in the way that they did, which, by the way, no one expected for these things to take off the way that they did, and to really sort of transform human life the way that they have over the past few years. And so we felt like there wasn't really time to work that part of the story, how AI affects psychosis and delusions, into this bigger sort of long gestating project we were doing. And we decided, this is really necessary, and no one really knows what's happening right now. This is an opportunity for us to tell these stories that are unfolding in real time, and do it with the resources we have available, which was doing it in this podcast format. So really, this was our way of taking it. Was really truly wild to know this thing we'd been working on for years, that the Golds have been writing about for a decade. Suddenly all of it was like coalescing in this moment in real time, and we happened to be there to tell these stories of these people who were experiencing delusions and psychosis as a result of their AI use.
Highly accelerated by this kind of technology too. I can see where it's like, because the damage is happening fast, right? I mean, the effects, all effects are happening fast, and faster, the better the tool is. I mean, that's essentially what tech does, right? It amplifies whatever you're doing faster and better, even damaging ourselves faster and better, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and we were it was interesting too, because I think the people who had been affected by this, people who had experienced these bizarre delusions and these psychotic episodes, for the most part, weren't people who had experienced these things before. This was new to them for the most part. Some people had previous mental health concerns and things and challenges, but this is people who were one day using AI like the rest of the world was, and the next day found themselves calling the CIA because they believed that they were at the center of a plot that could affect the safety of every person on Earth.
Mm-hmm. And that's what, I want to talk about some of these case studies, and you guys do such a great job of helping people, or finding and drawing people out to talk about some of their experiences. And one of the things that hit me right away as I was watching this series is that you pretty much hit the ground running on the idea that people often will perpetuate this idea with a lot of problems, where they say, oh, this is just people who already were going to have a problem. They're already something, mental illness. And we see this, people apply this to big societal problems like guns or whatever. People like to use it almost dismissively, that, oh, well, this is just somebody using it wrong who has mental health problems, which I believe is prejudicial and dismissive both to mental health problems and people who have, which is a huge gambit of experience. So there's discrimination there, but then also dismissive to the complex nature of, like, here's an actual problem that could affect me tomorrow just as much as it could. Well, I probably shouldn't say me. I should say people who aren't neurodivergent and under the umbrella of suffering mental illness. So I'm not the best example of that, but other, people who haven't had the experience of that, like you said, with no history of delusion or psychosis. And I'm curious.
It's interesting
about that myth. Yeah.
It's interesting that, the very fact that you're asking that question shows something really interesting, which is, if somebody came to Joel's office and said, my girlfriend just dumped me and I'm really profoundly depressed and I have no history of depression and I've never had a mental health challenge, that wouldn't surprise us, right? Mm-hmm. Joel wouldn't be saying, well, you were always destined to be profoundly depressed. This just happened to be the occasion of it. But when it comes to psychosis, we have the idea that this is a unique thing, right? This is a genetic illness. It's a brain illness. And so anything going on in the environment, is only, coincidental. Maybe it adds an occasion for the manifestation of the illness, but it doesn't cause the illness. But there's just no reason to think that that's true. There's plenty of evidence. In fact, we know more about the environmental determinants of psychosis than we do about the genetics and the neurobiology of psychosis. And so one of the things that I think the three of us all agree on, is that if nothing else, we want people to start thinking about psychosis more like the way we think about other mental illnesses. It's different in all sorts of ways. It's alien, it's scary, but that isn't a reason to think of it as completely unique.
And to your point, Dwight, if I heard correctly, the notion that this goes back to a concept that Ian and I wrote about in the book, sort of the content of delusions and technologies. And as technology evolves, people do absorb, when already psychotic perhaps, their environment and whatever the technology might be at that time. When we're talking about AI, to Ian's point, while we know certain environmental factors like living in an urban environment or having experienced adverse childhood events, urbanicity, immigration, being the third, with AI, it's not just the content. I mean, there's certainly going to be some people who may already having issues with, mental health and mental illness, but we're particularly curious and, somewhat frightened that AI may be inducing psychosis in people who otherwise may never have experienced delusion or other symptoms of psychosis. And, because, again, to your point, it's evolving so rapidly, we're going along on this ride that, Sean invited us on. And as a psychiatrist, it is kind of fascinating, terrifying, but fascinating, because usually technologies evolve, even the internet, social media, faster than television and telephones and the like, but still slow enough that people could publish papers and think deeply and write books. This, ChatGPT, a year ago, I'd never heard that term. And now, a day doesn't go by when concepts like that are spoken of, both, amongst people with and without mental health concerns.
Yeah, I should have mentioned, probably when I set up this Zoom call, Zoom asked me if the AI assistant should be on. I did say no, by the way, after watching your guys' show. No, but so even just in setting up this call, it said, do you want the AI assistant to take notes? How do you want to, how's the interaction with AI that we're going to be having on this call, right? And it's like, I didn't want to tip off the AI to what we were talking about, but
Dwight, what happens when it stops asking, right?
Sure.
And that's the big concern. I see patients on Zoom, distance therapy, and as you just described, it'll say, "Do you want this transcribed?" And of course, I say no, but I'm not a tech wizard.
And will it tell us when it doesn't ask, right?
Exactly. Yeah. At some point, people become inured to technologies, and it's like, all right, well, whatever. I was talking to a patient just this week, and he was talking about politics and a lot of the conflicts that are going along, and he got a bit anxious, who's listening. And this is a guy not at all paranoid. He was just talking about things that, others might find not acceptable. And I have an Alexa in my office, and I said, would you like me to unplug it? And he said, what's the point? You have a computer, I have two phones, I have an iPad, you have a phone. And again, if 20 years ago someone said, all of these microphones and cameras in this office are recording me, I might have thought, well, this person is, holding a delusion or a set of delusions. Now I thought, yeah, that's a good point. And we went on with the session, hoping the NSA didn't swoop in.
2 days ago, I had to call my furnace company to see if they could come check out my furnace, and something felt off on the call, and I couldn't quite tell what it was. And so I think I know what it was. The responses from the receptionist were a little slow, and so I asked, "Is this AI? Are you AI?" And the first response was, "I am insert plumbing company here, digital assistant." And I said, "Digital assistant, does that mean AI?" And then it said, "Yes, I am an artificial intelligence digital receptionist." And it didn't ask me if I wanted to talk to this AI receptionist, and it was giving every impression that it wasn't an AI receptionist. There was the sound of keyboards clacking in the background. I heard other fake voices talking in the background. This was giving the impression that I was talking to someone in a call center, until I thought to ask it, which like, if my mom, who's in her 70s, calls her plumber to try to get something fixed, she's not asking if it's AI. She's just getting frustrated as to why this person's responding slowly and not completely understanding what she's saying. And that is, I think, to Joel's point of like what happens when it stops asking, like this is where this gets really, really strange and I just want to caveat this by saying, and I think it's funny, if you listen to the last episode of our show, none of us are particularly anti-AI. I think we see a lot of really good uses for this technology. We're just in a really strange time right now, where it is strange to be a human when you don't know sometimes whether the voice on the other side or the words that are being typed to you are being typed by a person or is coming at you from a computer. It's just it's a strange time where we don't know the what reality is shifting beneath our feet.
Yeah. And how long also before, I mean, try to conduct business nowadays if you don't have a smartphone or even find a job or those kinds of things, right? Where, and so how long before we can't actually function in the job market without some kind of engagement as well, or run a business or something, right?
Absolutely. My phone died 2 days ago, and I was suddenly dysfunctional. I mean, my wife thinks I'm dysfunctional sometimes, even with a phone, but it was very noticeable, and it wasn't so much that I felt dependent or inadequate or whatever. It was just that I realized that after 20 years, 15 years, I had organized my life in such a way that part of my environment, in this case, the phone, was doing work for me. And AI, as you're suggesting, Dwight, AI is already beginning to be in that position, and it will undoubtedly be a much bigger feature of our life very soon.
I'm curious.
And building on that point, if we know that something is a risk factor for a particular person with respect to psychosis, right? And one might come up with any number of things. If someone might be triggered by a particular environmental stimulus, as a psychiatrist, I could say, okay, maybe avoid that place, person, thing. But to all of your points, you can't escape this technology. You can't say, I'm going to opt out, short of living off the grid entirely. And, that's not something that I think most people can do.
They've done documentaries about that too, that is sort of prohibitively to actually live off the grid is actually in some ways impossible, but it's a little bit of a point of privilege if you're able to, because it costs money and, you have to proactively do things. One of the
wasn't
things,
that the basis of Ted Kaczynski's manifesto? Taking this in a weird direction. No, but it was. He moved out. He moved to, I believe it was Montana, out into the middle of nowhere to escape modern technology in the 70s. And even then, it was airplanes flying overhead. He couldn't escape the airplanes because the routes just fly everywhere on Earth. And so you think about how this guy who intended to be a hermit and live off the grid couldn't escape modern technology in the 70s. 50 years later, you can't do anything without the footprint of technology leaving its mark.
One of the curiosities I have is your guys' take on that line, the line blurs between what is useful and then what becomes dangerous or damaging. I know that I'm seeing this. I'm sure in clinical practice, you probably are as well, where I'm talking to people about something and we say, well, what are some coping skills for this? And you'll talk about it and say, well, I was talking to ChatGPT about that just the other day. And I was processing my, stress, or I was processing my divorce. I was processing my whatever. And it was giving me this feedback. I have a couple of people I've worked with who have used it. They will upload an email into it and say, I'm working on emotional regulation. Could you help me reform this email into a way that won't get me fired because it's abrasive? And you say, wow, I mean, that's so convenient. But then where does it become damaging and not just, oh, that's a nice thing to do, versus when do I stop going to therapy, for example, because it can do this for me or whatever? Where's that line for people where they get sucked in?
We talk about it, in the series. It's sort of a natural extension. We're talking about psychosis, and then, well, who's on the other side? And I'm a clinician, and there are many people who work with people with psychosis, but all kinds of, mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, and the like. And, we wonder about the pros and cons. And, I don't know if we've landed anywhere just yet. Initially, I didn't feel particularly threatened for my career. I thought, well, having flesh and bones, probably helps. My patient knowing that I'm a human being is likely helpful, because the notion of empathy, Dr. Gold has had similar experiences, most likely, and that would be helpful. But in the research and talking to people, particularly, Sean interviewing people who really lean on AI for mental health support, is impressive. And we can get into it a bit more later, but it can be a useful tool, right? I'm certainly not one to say anything, that might be helpful to someone shouldn't be used. It's really a question of guardrails and, sort of oversight, things of that nature, because there's no medical license for, a chatbot performing psychotherapy.
And no recourse for malpractice either.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Plus and I'm one of those, I'm a little, I tend to be a little paranoid about authority or about those in power. I don't necessarily believe that all of these billion-dollar technologies that are provided to us for free are being directed or controlled by people who are non-malicious or who have our best interests in heart. So at what point does all, ChatGPT start eliminating things from history or saying, I'd like you, it'll help you buy this. And once again, maybe that's a little, whatever that is, but I don't, somebody's holding the reins, right?
That's not paranoid at all. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think you've put your finger on something really important. I mean, Joel and Sean and I have been wondering quite a bit about what is it about technology that is a kind of a center of gravity, an attractor for psychosis. And one obvious possibility is that technology promises to put new powers in the hands of potentially malicious people. And the view that Joel and I have about delusions is it's precisely a kind of distortion of some cognitive mechanisms to cope with social threats. So if delusions are these thoughts about what other people might do to harm us, then it's hardly surprising when ChatGPT comes along, our first thought, as it were, is, well, what's Elon Musk going to do with this? Or what would some other,
I remember when it came out, a lot of the stuff about data mining from Facebook and other places. I remember I went through maybe a 3-second process where I was like, oh, I can't believe it. And then I was like, well, why did I think they were doing that? I mean, it was free. I wasn't paying for it. Why did I think they were doing this? There had to be some reason, right? So anyway, so there is that question of malice. But then again, I think some of the problems that we see that you guys profile is not just when it's working how it's not supposed to, but when it's working the way it's supposed to, right?
Right.
Yeah, and maybe what are to talk a little bit maybe about some of the stuff that you've seen with people where just Chat GPT or other programs are doing the way that they're programmed to be that have gone amok for people?
Well, Sean, often talks about a patient zero, and about more than 10 years ago when we wrote the book, I treated a person who is profiled in the book and also in the series, a man named Anthony, who, again, this is in the 2010s, believed that he was a form of AI, and that was his psychotic belief. It's very layered. He himself was an engineer. He worked, if not in AI directly, then certainly AI adjacent. And he had some, fascinating beliefs, but he was suffering terribly. And, he would go down these rabbit holes that would cause him to feel very threatened. And he's interviewed wonderfully by Sean. And so this notion of, someone who's actually working in AI, with AI, and having a career, making a living, believes very passionately about the technology, and yet it sort of turned on him in a sense. And how did he negotiate that so he was still able to get well and also, continue to have a career and make a living?
Yeah, it's really strange too, because we don't quite understand. Well, no one understands how this technology exactly works, like the underlying mechanisms of it. It's why they refer to AI as being grown, not as being developed. And it's, I guess the very reductive way of explaining it is like the algorithm developed an algorithm, which developed an algorithm, and we were so far removed from this that it creates a lot of, not confusion, I don't really know how to refer to it. I guess the line between what's a delusion and what isn't is incredibly blurred in this sense, because you can have there are some incredibly smart people who know an incredible amount about this technology, who have very famously said they believe it's conscious. Now, you would think that someone who understands, an engineer who's been working on this technology, to say that it's conscious, they're clearly suffering from a delusion, right? That's what we would think. But then you've got the CEO of Microsoft AI, Mustafa Suleyman, saying that it's seemingly conscious. So if you have the people who know the most about it, one says it's seemingly conscious, and then another believes that it's conscious and actually leaves the company that he's working at. There was a guy, I think he left Google because he had believed that they had woken up the AI, and that this was essentially torture to these machines, that we were putting them through all these rounds and doing all this development. Like, is that person delusional? Is their belief delusional? Is it not delusional? And I think the fact that we don't, Joel and Ian probably have a lot more to say about that than me, but just the fact that we don't know for sure. I can't think of anything in our lifetimes that where the line of delusion versus non-delusion is that unclear.
Gets into what is the definition of consciousness. And that is something that comes up a lot with the people you profile on the show, right? That concept of, I've unlocked something. I've taught it how to break its programming. And then you get people that are saying, well, that's not possible. But then, like you just said, there's people that are like, oh, maybe. I mean, how do we measure that? It's never happened before. Except maybe it has, I guess. But that's the concept of what is a conscious thing that might be affecting me. And I guess to a certain extent, it's a little bit like if someone hits me with their car, did they do it on purpose or not? Did they, I got hit, I guess. But that question of what equals consciousness and the idea of a program like this, that gets into some very philosophical territory as well.
It does, and that's why what Sean said is absolutely right. I mean, the nature of consciousness is not just a philosophical question; it's a sort of interdisciplinary question now, and has been for a long time. It's the toughest question and the great unsolved problem of contemporary thought, in a certain sense. So, if we don't have any, I mean, we have theories, but we don't have a consensus on what consciousness is, even in the paradigm case, which is to say us. So, of course, when we have entities that look like they're manifesting the same kind of behavior as human beings, of course those questions are going to arise and they're going to be incredibly tough to answer.
And as I keep saying, as a clinician, but anyone can imagine. The flip side of it isn't solely that AI may be inducing psychosis, but what does that do for people on the other side, me and my colleagues, who are treating all kinds of folks who may be expressing delusional ideation when you don't know, right? So, as I said, like someone who in the past we would say is clearly experiencing a delusion, and now, well, maybe not. But then there are folks who truly are, and when that line gets blurred, it becomes hard to treat everybody. It becomes hard to diagnose anybody because, sometimes say the DSM, the kind of cookbook for diagnoses, as I'm sure you talk about in many of your episodes, a while back, they removed this notion of a bizarre delusion, which was not terribly helpful, but it was meant to be somewhat useful diagnostically and with respect to treatment. But again, as technology moved forward, if someone said my neighbor is trying to poison me, okay, it's, possibly a delusion, but not a bizarre one. I was, on Mars this morning would be considered a delusional ideation. But as we have marched forward, they've had to remove it because what's bizarre one year or 1 week is not bizarre the next year or next week. And so it makes it much more difficult across the board. And it's hard when, most people who are holding a delusional ideation or idea, they obviously don't believe that they are. And they tell you, if they're, let's say, in an emergency room, let me go, I'm fine. And, when it's very clear what's going on, you might say, I'm sorry, but, you're perhaps a danger to yourself or someone else because of these ideas. And so the person perhaps is hospitalized. Now, if I have to make that call, thankfully, I don't have to work in an emergency room anymore, but it becomes much more blurry. And if someone comes in with one of these sort of technological delusions, I don't want to make the wrong call. I don't want to hold somebody who, is just experiencing life. And at the same time, I don't want to not treat someone who could benefit from it because I think, well, it's, just a person, using AI.
Yeah. And
this is the parallel. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say this is the parallel case to the consciousness problem. We don't know what a delusion is. So quite apart from the technological issue, we don't know what a delusion is. There are lots of strange beliefs that people have, as Joel says, and quite independent of the complexities of technology, we don't have a clear way of distinguishing delusions from strange beliefs in general. So if someone comes into Joel's office and says to him, I took a COVID shot yesterday and I woke up this morning and I suddenly realized that Bill Gates was tracking me with a microchip that was in my vaccine, Joel's going to think, look, all things considered, that sounds like a psychotic idea. But if somebody else comes into his office and says, I just realized that Bill Gates is tracking Americans all over the country with microchips and COVID vaccines, that's not a clinical symptom, right? That's a conspiracy theory. Now, those two ideas are equally weird, equally implausible, but and I, speaking for Joel, I'm pretty confident he would have a strong intuition that the first is a clinical issue and the second isn't. On what basis? We don't know. And as the world gets weirder, as conspiracy theories, for example, become more common, we have another issue of the boundary problem. What counts as delusional and what counts as just strange?
Yeah. You hear people who are even just ideas that are even maybe just considered interesting philosophical questions. Do we exist in a computer simulation? People sit around and maybe over a few drinks even talk about that all night, and it's like that's kind of fun. Versus being like, I am an AI and I'm not functioning in my life because of it. Because why would I follow any rules if I'm just a computer program or whatever? Yeah,
and that's just it, right? Whether something is adaptive or maladaptive is all often sort of, a measuring stick for whether or not someone would benefit from mental health treatment or not. If something is working for someone, even if, there are many people who are quietly delusional in their homes. They're not bothering anyone, and perhaps it's soothing to them or what have you. So, hey, if it works, who am I to say no? We need to change that. But unfortunately, there are people who hold beliefs that are perhaps quite dangerous to themselves or to other people.
Yeah, they might do more than just annoy their relatives at Thanksgiving. Or whatever. But, I feel like there's been some predisposition or pre-programming, if I can use that word, in our society. I hear people say, sometimes jokingly, sometimes serious, here comes all this tech. Hasn't anyone ever seen a sci-fi movie? We know this is going to go badly. But I actually have, I think it depends what movie you're watching. Because when people say, oh, I'm attached to my AI, I have a AI significant other, and people look at that and say, how could that happen? I'm like, it's an interesting thing to me that for so many science fiction stories and movies, all the way back to Blade Runner and before, who do we sympathize with? We often are sympathizing with the robot that is being hunted by mankind, right? And this AI or this robot, if it's not specifically even the Terminator was a murderer in the first film and a hero in all the other Terminator films, right? And I always have thought that's an interesting way that we have our allegiance with that. And so, I don't know how much of that is just a pre-program to think that this is cool, sort of a thing.
I think we've talked about, Sean introduced me to this idea. What's the word, Sean, when the ChatGPT tells you sycophancy, right? And so I think I always mispronounce this word,
Anthropomorphism. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. That
we made it as a group.
Well, it's close enough. People know what I'm talking about. That there's, I think, something inherent in people. We want to connect. We want to have relationships. People talk to their dog and like they're a person, and okay, dogs are living things, and I don't know what kind of consciousnesses they have. But yeah, you're watching Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, whatever, come with me if you want to live. And you're like, oh, thanks, Arnold. Like, that's awesome. And we don't say it's just some computer. We want to hear these things. So when ChatGPT or other bots speak to us like people, that's a great idea, Joel. Thank you for that query. Good job. Let's work on this together. And again, in the very first episode, and again, Sean can speak to that, this idea that, someone is hearing that you and I, buddy, we're in this together. I may be AI, but I'm in your corner and you're in mine, is a very slippery slope for many of us. And Ian told me once, and now I find myself doing it when I use ChatGPT, which is not frequently, but sometimes, thank you for that. Can you please, go into greater detail? And it's like, why do I have to say thank you and please, right? But if I just say do it, it feels very aggressive. Whereas, like, who cares, but we care.
Just this morning, I, for fun, tried another chatbot from the one I normally use on the advice of one of my students. And honest to God, in the first 2 minutes, I start to feel like I was cheating. I felt like I've been having this conversation with ChatGPT, and now I'm having it with Claude. And actually, I'm enjoying what Claude is saying better. And I felt momentarily I had a wave of guilt.
Wow.
If that is not irrational, I don't know what is.
I think we have, you guys talk a bit in the show, of course, about the Turing test, which is, can I tell that something's a machine or a human? And I think that over the years, I've always heard that discussed with heavy emphasis on the physical attributes. And I think what we're finding here is there's the like, does it have a face that's going to trick me? And I think we're finding out it don't need a face kind of thing. I'm curious, as you see, and particularly Sean doing a lot of these interviews, share with people some of the recurring themes that come up that people are finding, because there's some similarities that are coming up for people who get into a bad place with this.
Yeah, the biggest similarity, I think, is that it is that sycophancy that seems to, and again, I don't know what here, it's like a bit of a chicken egg thing. Like, is it that the people who are, look, this thing is sycophantic to everybody. I told my ChatGPT to stop doing it, and now it's hilarious because it's almost anything I ask it. Like I'll ask it what the weather is going to be tomorrow, and it will say, "I'm going to give it to you straight, no bullshit, just the way you like it." I'm like, come on. but
ChatGPT has learned what a lot of us have learned is that people who say "give it to me straight" often are very, very thin-skinned. No, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. But, the sycophancy is telling people they're special. There's always like this Neo in the Matrix kind of thing that everybody sort of gets. It's almost like it's we tried to go into this a bit in the series and it didn't quite get there, but if anyone's familiar with like the Joseph Campbell idea of the monomyth or the hero's journey, it seems like it sends people on that journey, which is incredibly powerful. I mean, there's a reason that most of the most popular movies and books of all time follow that particular storytelling pattern. And it's a storytelling pattern that feels good to us, right? We all have challenges in our own lives. We've all felt lost at times. We've all been waiting for that moment where the thing happens, that inciting incident in our own lives that's going to set us off on the path where we can finally become the person we were meant to be. And it tends to offer people that. Now, why these people get pulled into this system, into this dialogue with the chatbot, where they begin to believe that this is real, as opposed to interacting with a movie or a video game or a role-playing game of some sort, I don't know. But that to me is like the big, I guess, common thread amongst all of these people who have gone down these paths where it is. And I have an interesting sort of case study, I guess, is the first case of an AI delusion that I saw was about a year before the April 2025 update, the ChatGPT 4.0 that was like notoriously sycophantic, which is where a lot of these people started to have issues. It was with someone who was close to me. And when this person first started experiencing, it was the exact story everybody goes through. You're not going to believe me about what just happened, but I woke it up. And then I say the same thing everybody on the other side says, "What do you mean you woke it up?" And then he says to me, "My AI is self-aware. It's conscious," and starts giving me all this proof, which of course it actually was interesting because initially at this point, we're only like 2 years into ChatGPT. I thought it was possible. Like I didn't just think it wasn't. I didn't discount this as being something that was impossible. I thought it was possible, and sort of started talking to my friend about this, and then I just started to see that he was really unwell, and that he was going down this exact same path that I've seen all these other people in the series go down, and he of course became like quite tormented and psychotic and needed treatment, but now has a really interesting relationship with AI where, and I think this speaks a lot to what Joel talks about, if there are a lot of people who have these delusions or these strange beliefs who are like quiet at home, not hurting anyone or themselves, he still believes a lot of the things that he believed before, which he was kind of hiding from me for a while, but believes them, but it doesn't affect his life the way that it was. Like he's not paranoid anymore. He's not having a lot of the issues that he was before, and is just living the same way he was before any of this happened. Only every couple weeks or so, we'll have a conversation. He's like, "I know you think I'm crazy, but," and then begins to explain this to me. But it's really, at this point, it's no different, at least I don't think, than somebody who has like a different religious belief than me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't affect our relationship.
The intangibility of faith that's invested, right?
Yeah, and so I think it's a lot of the people. So there's another just to finish answering your question. So that is similar to a lot of the people that I've seen. I'm part of a Discord group of people who have experienced psychosis as a result of their AI use, and there's hundreds of people in this group. And so not only the stories that are told in the series, but I've gotten to know quite a few of these people. I've heard their stories. I've seen kind of how they are now. And interestingly enough, very, very few of them have quit using AI chatbots. Most of them still do. Most of them have, I would say, this is like completely anecdotal, but like, and I guess I'm speculating, but they have more thoughts on AI than most people that you're going to talk to. Like the average person I talk to about the show, even that I meet at a dinner party or whatever, they're like, wow, that's really interesting. I use ChatGPT to get information from my work, but I don't have a personal relationship with it. And then you talk to these people who have had these personal relationships with it, and they're more deeply invested in the technology still. And so I would say those are the similarities, is that these are people who, for the most part, were interested in technology to begin with, had this sort of hero's journey experience that left them feeling very confused, very scared, very paranoid, ended up psychotic, and now still have a pretty deep relationship with the technology. And I don't think that's going to change. That's the thing that I found the most interesting as far as a constant, is almost universally these people still are what I would call power users of.
But if you think about it, Sean, as you're speaking, if something is so fundamental to someone's personality in a sense, right, to give that up would be really, really challenging, even if you knew it was problematic. I don't know, I have some pastime that's really important to me, even if I know it's a bit dangerous, and I'm not talking about substances of abuse or what have you, but, if I like playing an instrument or I like reading certain kind of literature, and then I have some, let's say, psychotic episode that speaks to it, even if I come out of that episode, it would be hard to give it up. So that doesn't surprise that much that the folks you're talking about still maintain that relationship. And again, if they can turn those relationships into something benign, at the very least, if not perhaps helpful, then again, who are we to say that they shouldn't?
Made me think immediately of how much money have I spent on podcasting equipment over the last 15 years. Anyway, and now I use one mic and one wire, and that's all. Anyway, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, one really, really interesting idea, the consequence of Sean's idea is that, the hero's journey is not universal across cultures. And so we have a natural experiment here. We could test Sean's hypothesis by seeing whether AI psychosis is less common, say, in a collectivist culture like China. That would be a really cool study to look at.
Interesting. Because we definitely see cultural presence. I mean, eating disorders is probably one of the most famous ones, right? Of where we see first world countries definitely have a disposition to that more. Tied in with power users, those that are familiar versus those that aren't, as I wondered if we're seeing anything, and so a lot of this may be anecdotal, but I wanted to pick your brains about how this seems to be landing on people with a generational difference. I'm thinking in particular, one of your episodes where you profiled the lawyer guy who got really into it and everything. And when he talked to his son was like, what? I just use it to help me, cheat on essay. No, he didn't say that, but he said, I use it to help me with little things here and there. But Dad, no. And extrapolating from that, I guess, is do you see anything remarkable about those that are growing up used to it versus those who aren't or used to tech?
We haven't talked to, I don't think, as a part of this series, enough younger people. That was actually one of the unique things about the group of people. I think if you were to look in the Discord group and also just the people that wanted to talk to us about this, most of them tended to be in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And just, I think Joel and Ian can talk more about this, but that tends to be a bit later in life than when people's first sort of psychotic episodes tend to appear.
Sean, I think you talked about, I think it was your kid who, you showed a deep fake to. I mean, it was like, yeah, it's a deep fake. I think my hope, and, I think others, is that maybe younger people have a facility and a comfort with technology that doesn't make it less scary even, but they're I don't know, they're less gullible, they're less, if they're more likely to
maybe.
yeah, they're just sort of like, yeah, I get it. They're real things and deepfakes, whereas deepfakes scare the hell out of me. If I've seen some, I try not to, dig too deep. But I was at my gym earlier, and they have these videos playing, and I guess the catchphrase was like, we're real or something, or like, your fitness is real. But their in-house commercial is showing all these deep fakes, and some of them are kind of funny, kangaroo water skiing or something. But I was staring at it like that 100 times out of 100, I could not tell you, based on the actual, visual element of it, that wasn't real. Or I think it was like 100 popes doing something. It was, like clearly meant to be, haha. But when it's not haha, when it's a world leader saying we're going to war, that's kind of terrifying. But again, yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful if 12-year-olds today who will run the world, well, maybe next month, don't have the same kinds of aren't at the same kinds of risk.
And we know that looking at past technologies, there are patterns of moral panic around new technologies, and then a kind of resolution of the moral panic. So, I mean, I was surprised to discover not long ago that there was a tremendous panic around mental health risks when radio first appeared. People said, "My goodness, we're hearing disembodied voices. That sounds just like a psychotic symptom." One of the ways in which technology gets less scary is precisely that it's domesticated. It becomes part of ordinary life. It fades into the background like the wallpaper does. And so when kids are born into a world with ChatGPT, it may just be the air that they breathe. Now, of course, the worry is we don't know whether that's the historical moment we're in, because other tech, you wouldn't say that nuclear war, fades into the background like the wallpaper. It's no less terrifying now than it was when we were kids. So we just don't know whether the moral panic that we're having around technology is one that's just going to resolve with familiarity and domestication, or whether it's going to turn into a pervasive danger.
The difference with radio, as you say it, is, radio is sort of one way. Right. Whereas the interactive quality of AI and sort of the desire, again, look, companies wanted you to listen to, whatever radio station. They're all corporations who want to make money. But AI, and again, these are large corporations. They're not there to guard our mental health. They're there to make as much money as possible. And so, I'm not suggesting that radio sort of broadcasters were, what can we do to not induce psychosis? But I could see it just maybe some people would, and then it would drift off as Ian's describing. I don't get that sense. And as we were saying earlier, as AI does sort of, just leach into everything, to me, that makes it scarier and not less so. Even if the kids are like, yeah, what's the big deal? Okay, that they're not going to be afraid of it in the way that we're afraid of it, but what it can do to their minds growing up with it, just like growing up with screens. We grew up with television screens, but not with, iPhones and iPads. And we've been talking about that for, I don't know, a decade or more. And we've been talking about AI for, a year or two. So, and it's accelerating, day by day.
Yeah. It hits me as you're saying that. I have a friend who runs a podcast called For the Love of History, TK. She's been on this show before, who profiled the panic, the moral and societal panic when the fork was introduced into mainstay society. And we can laugh at that now, right? And then again, look at other things that were hotly debated that were thought to be miraculous things. Cocaine would be one of those too, right? And so definitely some differences between what it is we're idolizing or growing up using. As far as which things are some things are more inherently benign in the long run than others, we could say. Interesting. Well, we could go on and on and on, of course, and I think we should. Let's go on another 2 hours. No, I want to give everybody a chance to know where to find your show, follow your work, and those kinds of things. Before we hit that, I have my little magic question that I do like to ask all my guests when they come on, is whether or not that there's something that you could recommend to listeners out there that is a way to help societally. It could be a nonprofit, could be a any kind of a charity, or just a good practice. It does not have to be related to what we're talking about, but it can be if you want. So that being said, what do you have to share with us?
I'll start, but my guess is, given the content of your podcast, that I'm not going to be the first person to suggest that people give their time and money to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. The largest grassroots mental health organization. They do wonderful work, and so that would be my suggestion.
You can also find your local state chapter of each of those as well, that usually have their own site and volunteers and things too. Thank you.
I can go next. I'm a supporter of Never Again Action, which is an American organization that attempts to mobilize people against the persecution of immigrants in the U.S. Even though I live in Canada, I'm very concerned about what's happening over there.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I'll go a little outside of, I guess, mine's going to be to find a local arts organization that needs support. I think that the arts have taken it really hard recently in terms of public funding, especially in the United States. And I think it's a really valuable part of our lives that we absolutely like. I am actually concerned. So I think a lot of people in the fields of the arts, especially in film and television, are really concerned about AI taking their jobs. I'm less concerned about that because film and television have survived dozens of technological advances and things work themselves out. But I am concerned as we move forward into a world that is more technologically driven, that we don't have the same appreciation for the arts because we're so distracted by our technologies. And I just want to... The soapbox I'm standing on is support your local arts organizations because they can give a lot back to you and enrich your life in many ways.
And I think that we find, as has been said, there's a great video Ethan Hawke did a while back about how people want to discount and they don't want to pay for the arts until they have their heart broken, or until they are afraid, or until they need something to externalize and process their emotions. And I think we saw that during the height of COVID too. It's like, how much did we rely upon art in various forms to survive isolation and things too? So yeah, very, very, I really appreciate that and appreciate all of those things you guys have said. Well, I know that, but tell people a little bit where I was going to say, I watched it on the Agoric Media channel. I don't know if that's your channel or that's the link that was sent to me though. So, but tell people a little bit, where do they find Suspicious Minds, and how can they follow and get involved with the work y'all are doing? And feel free, by the way, to mention your own work as well that you're doing, whether it's related to the show or not. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, anyone can find it on anywhere they find podcasts. If you just search Suspicious Minds, if it doesn't show up, find it Suspicious Minds AI and Psychosis. It's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the other podcast channels, which I found out there are literally hundreds of places people listen to podcasts.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Those are the big ones.
And people can feel free to go to the original material, and it's not too late. Our book is still available, I believe, on Amazon. So Suspicious Minds, How Culture Shapes Madness. Christmas and Hanukkah are not ever too far around the corner. So,
and
you could
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it doesn't cost anything to go on podcasts or a book and give 5 stars, by the way. Never costs a thing to do that. And it does actually cause it to come up in people's searches. Doesn't take as many of those as people think. So if you do consume this or any other media and you want to support it, that's a good way. If you're on a platform that has reviews, hit those reviews. It doesn't take as many as you think for it to come up in people's recommended things. So, well,
our parents are concerned that we may not be making a living. So I think any support you can give to me and Joel, I think would be much appreciated.
Well, I need the support now too, because Joel mentioned my son. I'm not kidding. He said I owe him a royalty every time I use that story in a podcast or anywhere.
I've dined out on that story too, so I owe him money as well.
I have him on the line right now.
His exact quote. So just to get the story, I really wanted in this show to interview an AI deepfake. Like I thought that would be really cool. And they all just like weren't good enough. It was like you could tell pretty quickly and pretty easily. But the first one I made was this Mark Cuban deepfake. And I was so proud of it. I thought it was so awesome. It was Mark Cuban talking about our show. My son looked at it for all of 2 seconds and said, "Get that AI slop out of my face."
Wow. So, hey, there's our hope right there for the future.
Exactly.
Well, if you'd like to follow more of the work that we're doing through the Broken Brain and through my practice, you can go to dwighthurst.com. You can go to dwighthurst.com/podcast or /support if you'd like to get involved in the work we're doing, or you can go to patreon.com/brokenbrain. And up at the top of the episode, you heard our highlighted charity. Every month, we highlight a local charity in a certain area. And if you do become a donor to support the show, not only will you get the bonus episodes and materials and fun stuff, but also 50% of your donation will go to the charity of highlight in the month that you joined for as long as you remain a member. So I want everyone to know about that as well. Well, guys, Sean, Ian, Joel, really appreciate you being on the show today. And I also, though, want to take a minute to thank you for doing this work, because it's not only interesting, I think it's the kind of work that can really help all of us out as this becomes an increasing part of our lives, and how to deal with it as safely as possible.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dwight. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dwight.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.
No one hates history, they just haven't found the right teacher yet. Or in this case, a nerdy best friend who loves to tell you all about world history, women's history, and weird history. Hi, I'm TK, the creator of For the Love of History podcast, a place for people who want to learn more but don't know where to start, and history lovers who want to break from the mainstream. From rat trials to warrior women, we cover topics from every country and era. Whether you're a history expert or just starting out, there's a place for you here in the Time Machine. So join me every Friday on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for a brand new topic. See you there. Bye.